All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning technology, cutting through the nonsense or the fluff, and getting the questions answered you need answered. So today is going to be a fun one for a number of reasons, which you're going to discover why it's going to be so fun here very soon. But what we're going to be talking about is skill development through mission-based learning. Now, that may sound very familiar to you. That may sound very foreign to you. We're going to unpack what that means and why it matters, because this is something that I tend to get a little amped up about myself. And I am joined by Guido. And you know what? I forgot to ask you how to pronounce your last name right before we went live. So I need you to say it again.
Or you have a go first, and then I'll tell you whether it's right.
I can't see it.
Oh, Schnarwiler.
Schnarwiler. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Guido Schnarwiler, and he's from theMission. So we're going to talk more about what that looks like. But while we're getting started, like we always do, we want this to be fun and engaging for everybody participating. So if you would do me a favor and comment where you are in the world today, let us know. Guido, I already know, but I'm not going to spoil it for everybody else. So where are you today?
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm sitting in Switzerland, in the heart of Europe, near Zurich. So it's 30 kilometers from Zurich.
Okay. All right. So you're in Switzerland. I'm in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where I always am. And so as we get into this, I do have my icebreaker question, which hopefully you didn't forget. Hopefully you didn't forget your answer to. But what's going to be, I'll actually also spoil what's going to be fun about this once we get started, but not just yet. So anyway, for that, all right, Guido, what is one thing in your personal life that if you could snap your fingers and instantly change it, what would it be?
All right. Yeah. If I could snap my finger, I think I would change the location of where I'm at the moment. I would like to sit in Australia actually at the moment, because
Really?
that was the plan. We were planning a timeout with the family.
Okay.
And we wanted to travel to Australia, take the kids out of school and travel to Australia, which for obvious reasons wasn't possible. So if I could snap my finger, I would be there right now.
Okay. So have you been to Australia before?
Never.
No. Okay. So
Never.
that's why. So is that like a bucket list thing where it's like, we really want to go to Australia?
Yeah, probably it is. It's just a dream location. I imagine the people to be very relaxed and close to nature. So many things to explore, and yeah, just go to the other end of the world. That would be fantastic at the moment.
Right. Well, you're in gorgeous Switzerland.
Exactly.
Switzerland, right? And you're wanting to go to Australia. I know some folks in Australia. I actually wouldn't mind going to Australia, but I have 5 kids right now, so traveling anywhere, not really in the docket. So maybe I'll go in my virtual headset or something like that. Okay. So would you snap your fingers and be there? Or would it just be you would be able to go? That's where, I'm curious on that.
No, I would be there. Okay, I would really be there.
Boom, boom, yeah. Whole family
exactly.
in Australia.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Family, describe the family for me.
Yeah, I'm married and we have 3 kids, 10, 8, and 7.
Okay. Yeah. All right. You're right in the thick of it too. Okay. So I've got 5, 10, 9, 6, 5, 4, 2. So I'm right there. I'm right. All right.
That's unbelievable.
I can see why you'd want to snap your fingers and be there. I can see why you would want to snap your fingers and be there. Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. So for me, if I could snap my fingers and change anything instantly in my personal life, it would be, we bought this house where I live now in Waukesha. I think it's been 3.5 years ago now. And we had these grand plans to do a bunch of projects ourselves. We're going to DIY this house. We're going to change things and we're going to do it all ourselves. And let's just say we have a habit of starting projects and then we don't always finish them. And so we have a lot of projects that are kind of in the middle of things. So if I could snap my fingers, it'd all be done. The house would be done. All the projects would be done. If anybody knows a great, contractor in Wisconsin message me, because this is kind of one of the things my wife and I talk about all the time. Is we're like, what have we gotten ourselves into? Now we have all these projects that are in midstream, and when are we ever going to get them done? So that would be mine.
Yeah, maybe we need to take a closer look at that. Maybe it qualifies for a mission, which we can talk about later.
There we go. If you can help me solve that problem, I would be all over that. So, all right. Well, I'm looking forward to this. And again, the funny part is, what's going to be so fun about this, for those of you who are watching, is Guido and I were talking about this before we came live, on the fact that, so Guido's introverted, right? He's introverted, as am I, which most people don't believe, but we both were. And so we're talking about the fact that this is not our comfort zone, being out here talking to a live audience of people, just having a conversation, but we're going to get through it, and we're going to have so much fun. And Guido is secretly super excited, right? That's what you told me. Totally excited.
Absolutely. I learned to transform anxiety into excitement. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So let's transition over to the topic at hand, which is mission-based skill development. Before we even really let's actually define that, at least at a high level. I think we'll dig into it on a deeper level as we get into it. But when we're talking about this, when people say a mission for skill development, how do you tell people what that is? Like, let's just do the brief elevator summary of, how do you explain to people what it is the mission does?
Well, to put it in probably very simple words, it's action learning. So basically what it means is you do a task, you solve a problem or you solve a challenge, and you try to learn something by doing that. And you reflect during the process of fulfilling a task. Basically, that's the very basic description, I would say.
Okay. So it's experiential or action-based, putting learning to work, so the mission would be like, there's a problem, there's a situation, and then you're working to solve that at a high level.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think we've been doing that for the last 20 years with lots of clients, lots of different organizations. And we were doing this on site with participants in a venue, and they were solving a
person thing.
Sorry?
Originally, it was an in-person thing. You were doing this in
Exactly. We've been doing that for almost 20 years in person, on site with people. And then we were starting to experiment with it more and more. And for instance, we were taking challenges from one organization, and we were letting participants from another organization solve that challenge of the other organization. So they had to be empathic and think about what could the challenge really be, and how can we help the other organization to overcome that challenge.
Okay.
And that was still on site. That was still personal on site learning. And eventually we were thinking about, why not do the same thing virtually? Why not bring people together from all over the world who don't know each other, who have to get to know each other first, who have to build some trust first, become a team, and then to solve a real issue of another organization. Or that was the idea.
Okay. So there are so many things I want to dig into on this one, like so many things that I want to dig into on this. But before I do, so I have to ask, because there's three of you that co-founded it, right?
Yeah.
So when you were a kid, did you know what? We're going to do mission-based action learning as a company. I mean, how did that even start? Like, where did the three of you, were you sitting around the pub and one day you went, you know what, what was that story? How did that begin 20 years ago?
Well, at the time I was working as a learning leadership development expert for Swiss Re, for Swiss company, Swiss reinsurance company. And obviously we were looking for ways of how to develop our leaders in a sustainable way. And I mean, all the traditional ways of learning we've been through at the time. I mean, front-loaded trainings or case studies and so on. And at the time we were starting to experiment with action-based learning. So for instance, I can remember one episode where Swiss Re wanted to get a Chinese license. They wanted to do business in China. Okay. And so we had the idea to come up with some actors, some Chinese actors who would represent the Chinese government. And our leaders had to convince that government representatives to get that license. And that was like one of the first experiments we did with action learning. So that was still a role play, but it was a bit more real.
But it was
than
a more complicated role play, because that's not just like, oh, Guido,
exactly.
pretend you're a Chinese government agent. You actually got actors to come in and actually play that cast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then it went on and on. So it became more and more realistic. For instance, then we brought in some students from the university, and then our leaders had to convince them to join Swiss Re. So they first, I mean, those leaders had to learn about the company and the benefits of the company, and they had to convince the students that Swiss Re is an attractive employer, for instance. So that was even more, because then the students were real, the challenge was real, and so on. So we did experiment with that sort of thing.
It was a real deal. Like, it's, you actually have to try and convince these students why.
And there's something at stake. Yeah, there's.
Do you know enough information? Are you good at it? Like, you're going to actually have to try and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was something at stake. I mean, the leaders had a responsibility. If they fail, if then the reputation would suffer. So there was something at stake.
Okay, so you're doing this for the Swiss company, and then you said, "Hey, we're on to something here."
Yeah.
So then how did you make the transition out and partner up with your colleagues and move on to this?
Yeah, and during that time, I also got to know Matthias, one of our co-founders as well. And he was, at the time, he had invented a real interesting approach to action learning. So what he did, he took leaders to a SOS Children's Village.
Okay.
And those leaders had to work with the kids at those SOS Children's Villages and to do a project with them. So, for instance, they had to do, at the end of the week, they had to perform a play on stage about conflict resolution, for instance, which was a topic in that SOS Children's Village, to how to deal with conflict. Okay. So our leaders, or the leaders at the time, they had to go there, make a connection with those kids, and perform a project with those kids. And the challenge, obviously, is kids are very they're very open, and they're not hesitating to give you feedback, or their feedback is very direct. I mean, if they are bored, they just walk away, or they don't show up the next day because they find it boring. So our job as facilitators was to coach those leaders and to reflect with those leaders on how they do with the kids and what that has in common with leadership at their companies. So there was another step, and that was a very important experience for us to realize how powerful action learning with real challenges is.
What's interesting about this, and why I love this topic, is what you're talking. I think sometimes we talk about learning experiences. That term gets thrown around in the industry a lot. Oh, it's a learning experience. But I don't know that all learning experiences are created equal. And I would say not all learning experiences are people actually learning anything. They may be acquiring new knowledge, but they may not actually be learning how to do something or getting better at something that they weren't very good at. And what you're talking about is actually deconstructing that situation and then facilitating true experience, like an actual experience where you're doing that kind of thing. I'm curious, as you were doing that, and I'm curious, just what were, how do how were you able to take that apart a little bit? Because I've seen organizations try to do this, or I've seen people try and do this, and sometimes we just miss the mark because it's not actually solving a real problem. We're so focused on creating this hypothetical situation that it doesn't actually translate over to things. So it sounds like some of these missions you're talking about, yes, they're real situations, but it may not necessarily be the exact thing people are doing or facing, but it's close enough that you're bridging the gap.
Yeah, and that was also one learning process for us, that we realized the closer we manage to bring the reality of the leaders to life in those leadership challenges. So the smaller the gap from that challenge to their reality is, the easier is also the transfer of the newly acquired skills.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you have, to make an example, if you have Chinese actors in front of you, there's still quite a gap to the reality, right?
Yeah.
But if you're taking a real challenge of your own organization and you have to solve it, but you don't just solve it as a project, but you solve it as an action learning challenge, where you have spaces for reflection, where you get feedback, interpersonal feedback, and so on, then it becomes much more real, and the learning is more impactful and sustainable, probably.
Okay. So how is I'm curious just the response. So you were doing this was 20 years ago, that you started doing these kinds of things. What was the response? What was the response from the participants? Because I think sometimes what I've seen is there is this natural skepticism from people, because that's not necessarily what they've experienced in learning and development before. If they've been put in a case study, it just feels very academic versus action, like you said, action oriented. So there was some healthy skepticism behind, yeah, here we go. Here's another thing you're going to ask me to do. So I'm curious, when you first engage with participants on this, what's the attitude? How are people responding to it?
We experienced a lot of that skepticism, and sometimes it was that high that people were thinking about walking away from the experience, because it can get quite messy. In terms of, I mean, imagine this situation at the SOS Children's Village. If those children just walk away, or if they show resistance to what you're trying to do with them, and I think what helped us there is that we were investing a lot of time and energy in the relationship between us and the participants. Okay. I think that was the key, that we needed to get their trust. I think that is essential. If they don't trust you, if they see only the challenger in you, or if they think you're trying to make their life more difficult, then I think they would walk away probably when it gets messy or when it gets difficult. But if you have a solid basis with them, if you have a trust level with them, then I think they're able to go into a reflection mode, and then they can detect very valuable insights. But we were sometimes at the edge of that. So I remember one participant in one of those SOS Children's Villages who several times said, "Now I'm gonna go. I don't have to do this. This is crap. I'm going to walk away." And we managed to hold him back, to keep him in the setting, with a lot of discussions, late at night, whenever. And at the end of the program, he said that this was the most valuable experience in leadership development he's ever had. Okay. Because he was able to stay, and he was able to look into the mirror and realize what was maybe not ideal in his own behavior, what he can change, and to learn from it. And since this is such an emotional process also, that's, I think, the key why it's so impactful, because it's insights and emotions put together, and that makes it extremely memorable for people.
Okay. Well, and it's interesting that this conversation's timely for me, especially with some things I have going on right now, because I think to me this is such an important thing for people in our field to think about, especially when it comes to people's live time, right? Especially when it comes to people's live time, because you can deliver content. You can deliver content in a million different ways and let people consume it when they want, how they want, where they want, the speed they want, all this stuff. But when you're actually bringing people together to do something, at least from my perspective, it has to be action based. It has to be something that creates that response that you're seeing in participants that are like, this is uncomfortable. This is making me frustrated or challenged, or I'm being pushed in ways that I don't like, because that's really where the learning's happening. And some of that stuff, that is the stuff that can only happen through experience and can only happen live. So if we're using people's live time, I think sometimes this is where we see people check out when they think of corporate learning. You're just going to tell me more information. You're just going to make me kind of take a quiz or a test, or you might ask me to solve a case study, but it's not really pushing me into something I may not be comfortable with. And I think sometimes we're afraid to go there, but hearing that story, it just further validates for me, we need to get better at that. We need to get better as an industry at figuring out those situations and pushing people into them.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think that was one of the insights we also had, that we started to challenge the order of learning, so to speak. So normally or traditionally, you learn in order to solve problems later on, right? So you try to learn some new skills, and then you hope that eventually later on you can use them to solve some problems. And we are now challenging this by saying, okay, we let people solve problems and we hope that they learn something by doing that.
Yeah.
And that in our logic makes more sense.
It's funny with that, because, and again, I'm sure somebody could find some sort of data or white paper on this, but just even, from my own personal experience, this is a flip. I think, well, let me be careful how I say this, because I don't necessarily think we need to swing the pendulum completely, but I do think we need to create more opportunity for that flip to happen. Because people, they need to fail. And I think that's one of the things so often we're afraid to do, is we're afraid to put people in situations where they might not succeed. We're afraid, well, what if they don't pass, or what if they don't do it? And I would say, good, because that's what's going to draw out of them that response where, well, the kid walked away. What the heck? Well, let's talk about that. Why do you think that the kid got bored and left and wasn't interested in coming back? That's really what drives that reflection and that kind of hard look in the mirror on, well, what are you not doing well? What are the real gaps that you have that can then lead to the motivation you need to actually want to go develop more skills, because you say, you know what, I guess I'm not really that good at this skill, versus, like you said, I think a lot of times we just assume we need to tell people everything and get them up to speed before we put them into things, versus saying we can put people into things and then they can learn afterwards.
And I think you mentioned failing, for instance. I mean, how do you want to learn to fail if you can't fail really? I mean, to fail in a case study is one thing, but to fail in a mission or in a case which is real, where you have a real stakeholder or a real sponsor of that case who has expectations towards you, and you fail, is a totally different story. And then to reflect on that and to take insights about yourself as a leader, or as a group, as a team also, is a different story, because you have to, it's much more real.
Yeah.
If there's something at stake, then it's a different story.
So I have to ask this. because there's and don't worry about the background noise. So there's this psychological safety piece that I think sometimes people fail. And I'm really curious how you manage that, because that's a real thing. And I think that's where it's easy sometimes to say, yeah, we should make people fail more. Yeah, we should put them in the hot seat. And you can't just do that recklessly. You can't just throw people and go, it's fine. Like, don't worry about it. You're going to crash and burn, because there is a good reason that people do struggle with failure. There's a good reason why, and everybody's threshold and everybody's thing is different. So I'm curious, how do you work with people on that so that it is a secure environment where, yes, there's real consequences. Yes, there's, things that actually happen as a result, but it's not so far that it's actually causing damage or harm to the participant. How do you strike that balance?
I think we try to do that by investing enough or a lot of time in the beginning of creating a relationship and create some trust, either on one side between the participants who usually don't know each other in the beginning, right? It's a mixed group of people from all over the world or from different organizations, and also the trust between us and them. That's extremely important, and I think you can't invest enough in that part. And to create that safe space, as you also describe it, this psychological safety within a group. And then obviously, I mean, we also do some expectation management in the beginning with the sponsors also, who provide the case. I mean, they are aware that it's a learning experience, and they're not hiring a consulting company to solve their problem, and they don't pay for that. So there are also all sorts of things which we do, but I think the key is really the trust level and the relationship in the beginning. Okay. And we've made some experiences also when we didn't do that enough, that people didn't dare to go into that self-reflection mode enough. Also, I think there's a direct correlation.
Well, and I think it's an important message for people in our field who may be moving into this territory and saying, all right, we want to do more experiential action type stuff, but how do we do it in a positive way? And I think you hit on two really important things, which is one, you cannot underestimate that trust side of things and building that culture and environment where people know it's okay. Like you're not going to lose your job, or you're not going to get beat up if you fail. This is that we expect you to fail. And I think that goes to your second point, which is expectations. And you hit on the stakeholders, but I think that's also important for the participants to know you should fail. We plan on that. We designed this for you not to just get a trophy and get to the finish line. You should struggle in this, and that's okay. And that way, I think it does mentally set people up to know, okay, so it's I'm not bad, or I'm not falling short if I don't make it through on the first attempt. No, that's quite all right. So that there is that security. But again, you cannot underestimate that. And that's where I have seen it gone south, is I've seen sims or mission type things before where they don't set that expectation or take the time to build that trust, and people come in cold and it doesn't go well. It does not go well at all. Or people just don't truly engage. They get very defensive. They get very protective, and they either don't participate or they just are like, I'm out. I'm done. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I think what it also takes is enough spaces for reflection, and that the participants get into a rhythm of doing stuff and reflecting on what you did. So that has to become like a normal thing to do, which we usually don't do in everyday life. In everyday life, we are so driven that we only perform, and we hardly ever reflect on how we did or what we did and what worked well and what didn't. So I think that's also important that people realize, okay, I can experiment with things, and then I reflect on things, and then I try to make it better next time. So that's that this becomes a normal flow of things.
Well, and the one thing you didn't mention, because I think that cycle is one we need to be much more intentional about. There's opportunity for us to be much more intentional about. Let's have people do something. Let's, like you said, be intentional about making sure, because it is true. So many times people, they're just going through stuff, not necessarily thinking about, why did it go this way? Why did it not go this way? What would I have done differently had I done things differently? And forcing that point of reflection is powerful. The one thing that you didn't mention, but even from your earlier points, it sounds like this is part of it, is that then coaching element. I'm guessing as a facilitator, you've also got some insights that you're sharing with these people along the way as part of that, in case their reflection either isn't 100% on target or maybe is incomplete. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one important element of the whole process, that we as facilitators, we also do one-to-one coachings with people. I mean, in the beginning, they come up with some individual learning objectives also when they start the process. And we are accompanying people through the process, also keeping an eye on those individual learning objectives. So, because, I mean, we want them to take away something on the individual level.
In addition to this kind of bigger problem that they're solving for.
Exactly. So the outcome is usually a solution to the problem, but then also a lot of learning on individual level, but also on group level as a team. Okay. So that's always our goal. And to keep, the challenge often is to keep the balance between those two, because people, especially when they see a purpose in the challenge, when they want.
Oop, you hit mute. You hit mute, Guido. Unmute yourself there. There we go.
The participants want to do a good job. They want to deliver a good result. And then it's our job as facilitators to hold the horses and to balance that with learning. Because the closer the deadlines come when they have to deliver to the client or to the sponsor, we have to make sure that they keep on doing the reflections, because they only want to perform, they only want to deliver a solution.
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about, and I think this is just it's a valuable thing that I've seen, especially, and this is where I'm curious how the transition has happened as you've evolved over 20 years of doing this, and then also now, especially recently, moving into the virtual space. But you know, as I look at this journey for a lot of L&D organizations, this is one where I think sometimes facilitators or can feel threatened by this new move, because historically, a lot of times when facilitators have been facilitating, they've been delivering content, right? They've been facilitating content and sharing informations and insights and doing that. And this is true facilitation of an experience where, if we want to get academic on it, this is where you move from sage on the stage to guide on the side, where your role as a facilitator, I think, is even more elevated in terms of the value you're bringing. But it's a very different set of skills in the way you're executing that, because your job is not to sit and tell everybody things, but your job is to set the stage, to build the trust, to serve as that kind of coach and that facilitator through the experience to help people get the most out of it. And to me, I think that is an extremely rewarding place to be in that space, but it is a big shift. It's a big shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So with that,
as an introvert, that's quite good, because then you don't have to be on stage, so it plays into your card.
Well, what's funny about it is it's actually kind of a true thing, and I think sometimes and again, I think extroverts can learn how to work in that environment, but I will say it can be a very powerful environment that you can thrive in as an introvert, because instead of feeling like you have to be up on stage in front of everybody, you are kind of on the sidelines, and it is a natural transition. It's easier to play in that space, but it's, in my opinion, it's no less valuable. If anything, it's fantastic because you're truly facilitating a learning experience. Now, my question to you is, as you've kind of gone through this transition, what have been some of the big learnings over 20 years of doing this that you've taken? You know, what are some of the things that early on you thought this would work really well, but then it didn't, or you've had to evolve it?
Well, besides the things we've already talked about, that the connection, the trust, that is something really important. And I mean, in the last probably two years or so, and that has probably also to do with the age me and my colleagues are in, that we wanted to add another element to this action learning thing, and this is the corporate social responsibility, or the sustainability aspect of things. So what we are trying to do with the mission is to bring in challenges which are related to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. So those, they're not just projects of a given organization, but we also try to find challenges which are adding to the benefit of the world, so to speak, if you wish.
Okay. So moving beyond just this tactical execution of, hey, here's a problem that, you know, you may be facing, which is important. It's important that there's some direct relevance, but digging into that deeper purpose of this challenge is, yes, it's not only solving a short-term problem, but it's contributing to a larger purpose.
Exactly. And we realize that on one hand, the younger generation of employees or of leaders, they are buying into this because they seem to have different values in terms of what they want to do with their time. I mean, when we were younger, we had our career in mind, and we wanted to, you know, move up the ranks and so on. The younger people nowadays, they have the ambition to contribute to the world. They are very selective about how to invest their time. And so that's a good thing. And also experienced leaders who participate in our programs, they say that finally I can combine contributing to something which makes sense and try to learn at the same time. So finally, I don't have to solve, you know, interesting case studies, but which are, you know, it doesn't matter whether I do them or not. Now I can make a difference and learn something by, you know, develop skills by doing that.
Yeah.
And that's another element.
And I think, you know, this is something, I think there's something valuable in talking about this just in general, because I think there's opportunity to do this, not just in learning and development, but I think a lot of these things where you're looking for shared opportunity. I think this is where you see things really accelerate, is when you say, yes, you're doing this thing, but it's not happening in a vacuum. You're not doing this just for the sake of doing this. You're doing it because it's connected to this and this and this, and the overlap. You're working and solving multiple things at the same time, rather than just trying to find time. Because I know you read any research study or any, you know, survey coming out of our field, one of the biggest complaints of people is they want to develop, they hunger to develop, but they feel that they don't have the time to do it. Now, that's easy to say, oh, well, the solution is let's just chop everything up into micro nanobytes of content and things like that. And I think there's some value in doing that. But at the same time, we all have the same 24 hours, and people will make time for things that matter. They will make time for things that matter. And I think what you're getting at is, when we figure this out and we figure out how do we make what we're doing matter, people will find time for it. I mean, it sounds like people nobody goes, you know what, I really got to go. I can only be here for 7 minutes today because I don't have any attention span and I need to go. It sounds like by actually connecting the dots on this, people are finding value and they're willing to make the investments.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, our experience is also that a lot of people would like to contribute to the good or to the better of the world, but they don't know how. They struggle how to do that. Besides just, you know, donating money. And in the mission, we also offer a way of contributing without just donating money, but you can really do something.
Okay. So it's really kind of social cause combined with skill development, all in the same thing, where you're saying, look, come do this and do the thing. Cause I mean, I think it's rare you come across somebody that's like, no, I don't really want to contribute to anything. I think just naturally people have that desire to want to contribute to things. But like you said, a lot of times they don't know how, or they feel they don't have time because it feels like something they have to do outside of some of the other things. It's this isolated thing. And what you're talking about is saying, connect those dots, bring those two together so that you're accomplishing 3, 4 things at the same time. You're developing skills, you're solving problems, you're contributing to a social cause. That's something that now people are saying, yeah, I've got time for that. I've got time for that because that's meaningful value to me and something bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for instance, we had this mission going on with the African Leadership University. Just to make an example, the African Leadership University was the sponsor. It's a very innovative organization in South Africa and in Mauritius and in different locations in Africa. And they're attracting a lot of African students, but in order to grow and in order to be more and more relevant, they need also international students. Okay. So they were sponsoring a case of how can we become a more international brand and how can we attract more international students to bring that cause of Africa. How can we grow leaders in Africa, also to make it a more international issue? And that was the case which was provided, and some leaders from different organizations were working on this challenge to provide the African Leadership University with a concept how they can grow and how they can become a more international brand. So that's a concrete example of how to bring a social, a meaningful or a purposeful challenge to life, and how to make a leadership challenge out of that.
So now, is that part of? Now, I'll just ask because I think it's an important piece that you just hit on there. Now, is that part of the design process then? As you're actually designing these missions, you're actually saying, "Hey, let's talk about this." Because a lot of times we talk about let's start with the end in mind or start with the problem, but I don't think people always know what that looks like. And it's not a bad thing. I think sometimes people struggle with what does that actually look like? And so is that then part of the design process as you're designing these missions to say, what are you really trying to accomplish out of this? And also is there a bigger picture? Is that how you're actually starting with the design that then you back into what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we see ourselves also as sort of matchmaker between people who have a challenge and learners who want to learn some skills. And we are trying to do that magic and bring these people together to form like a community, so to speak. I mean, on one hand, we try to network with organizations who have a need. And on the other hand, we try to acquire some participants, and then we try to make that match and bring them together because we think, both can benefit from each other.
Okay. So that's part of, I mean, in terms of the mission, and we're not talking about the mission, the actual mission itself, but the company, the mission that you and your co-founders are working on, that's part of what your organization is doing, is working with organizations to say, hey, who are the organizations? What are the challenges? But then also who are the individuals out there who would be a good match to help solve this problem or contribute to this social cause, all the while developing the underlying skills that are happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the participants, for them, it usually starts with that they say, I want to learn some new skills. We call them 21st century skills, like agility and creativity and so on. Yeah. And that's the starting point for the participants. And then they find, okay, I could now go to whatever platform and consume videos about it, or I can start a mission and I can try to learn these skills by immediately applying them on a real course. And that's the starting point from the participant side. And our network on the organizational side then helps us to come up with relevant challenges which match, which build the platform for the participants to learn.
Okay, got it. Got it. So that helps me just even understand the business itself in terms of how that works. So yeah, I mean, I can see. So this is really an opportunity for people who are trying to develop skills to have a completely different way of doing that. And I think it's interesting. What's interesting about it is it's an opportunity to step outside. Well, see, now you're adding another layer of value to it in the sense that, one, you get to solve a problem that's outside kind of your realm of things while still making it relevant, while still contributing. And it sounds like you're also bringing people together from all over. So you're connecting with new people, correct?
Absolutely. And that's very valuable for people, that they can build a new network of like-minded or also different-minded people that they, after this, I mean, the whole experience goes between 6 and 10 weeks or so. And so that's an intense time they spend together. They struggle with each other. They go through crises also, but eventually they succeed. And that's a very enriching and, experience which brings people together. And sometimes these relationships last. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So that's where I want to shift now, because I'm curious just from a tactical standpoint. I mean, some people might have heard 6 to 8 weeks and thought, like, that's a lot. But what I think is interesting about that and the value of that is the fact that you don't build skills overnight. And even just in the real world, you don't solve business challenges in 2 days. You don't have a, SWOT analysis meeting and come out of that and have fixed things. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes attempting things and having that fail. So walk me through one of these things. Like, what is an actual mission? If I'm a participant, what does that structure look like over those 6 to 10 weeks?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first week or so, that is dedicated to team building and to connection. So that's when we try to bring people together. I think it's especially important when you work virtually, that you bring people together, that they get to know each other and they build a connection. And then they learn about the challenge. So they learn what the problem is they have to solve. And that's usually done by a video. And maybe we can show a video, an example later. And then they have to try and understand better what is it really they have to do. So they have to develop some questions. So they have to interview the sponsor. So they have to be empathic with the sponsor. They have to learn what is the real challenge behind the official one, maybe. And then they start working. They learn some agility skills. They learn some design thinking skills, but they don't learn design thinking skills just for learning them, but they use them immediately, because they have to do some persona work in order to solve that challenge, and they immediately apply those skills to the real challenge. And then they usually go through iteration.
Hang on. I told you I was going to cut you off at some point.
Yeah.
So there is, and I think, because we talked about this earlier, that, sometimes it's just, push people into the pool and let them go into it. And sometimes they need some sort of development. And it sounds like, as part of this mission, you're not isolating development or saying, no, we're not going to educate you on anything. It's just, it's going to be tailored specific to this. So as part of this process, there is some skill development or knowledge development that's happening to prepare you for the experience, but it's very intentional and connected to the actual mission.
Exactly. So we provide them with some input. We teach them a little bit, but not so they can memorize it, but they can apply it immediately. They need to apply it immediately afterwards. So we provide them with the knowledge they need in order to be successful in the mission. So that's the rhythm.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. And you're pulling people from all over the world for this, correct?
Yeah. Okay.
Now I'm curious. I am curious because I'm curious what this transition looked like from in person to virtual. Because now I'm here in 6 to 8 weeks in person. That would be pretty rough. I think it would be easier to pull off virtually. But I'm curious, as you made that transition, how did that affect things? And also, sometimes I've heard people say, "Oh, virtual, it's not the same. You can't connect with people the same." Now, I will go head to head with anybody who wants to have that conversation, because I will vehemently defend the fact that you can have meaningful connections in the virtual space. But I'm curious, how have you helped make that transition? Because there are some things that you have to do differently. If you just try and do what you did in person virtually, it will not work. It just won't be as effective. But if you do it intentionally and with purpose, it can. So I'm curious how that shift happened.
Mm-hmm. So, our on-site programs, they were in 2 or 3 or 4 days. So the days were together. So they didn't have.
It used to be just really compressed.
Because you had to fly people in. They came also from all over the world, so you cannot fly them in every 2 months for a day. So they came in for 3 or 4 days, and they were working on that challenge day and night, more or less. And then eventually, at the end of the program, they would deliver the result. And so this is now
accelerated boot camp type thing when it was in
Yeah. And now with the virtual work, we have the benefit of splitting that time up to 6 to 8 to 10 weeks, which enables people to experiment much more. So they get some input, they have to do something during the week, and then we see them again at the end of the week. We do a reflection, and so go the weeks. So that's really a benefit of the virtual work, that we can extend the learning process to more time, which makes it even more sustainable, I think, rather than having a very intense experience in 3 days in a hotel or wherever, and then go back to your reality, and then you have this transfer again. So here you are at your computer, and this is the new reality for a lot of people anyway, that they have to work virtually together. And here they can experiment with some new behaviors working virtually. So that's the new reality anyway.
So it's interesting. It's interesting how you bring this up. And I think this is one of the things that I think this is where technology is unlocking the possibilities of this stuff. Because like you said, I think, and what I did share a video in the comments, because we're going to run out of time, just like I promised we would. And you didn't believe me.
No.
So, but the point with technology is this used to be a real limitation, because you were trying to coordinate this in-person stuff. And so to get people to travel in and try and do this, it did kind of force you into a box of, well, we have to cram what we know really should take maybe a couple months for people to actually absorb and digest and process and reflect and learn and build and grow. But we don't have that luxury, because they're only here from Wednesday to Friday. So we better just make it happen, and let's pack this in. And this is where I think technology has done a fantastic job of, it's unlocking that possibility and saying, actually, we don't have that barrier anymore. We no longer have that barrier to say, oh, we need to compress all of this into this time window, because the reality is that did leave people, even if they had a fantastic experience in 4 days, 3 days, and they really had some meaningful insights, because it was so compressed, they get bounced back to their real life, and that degrades. It just very quickly degrades, versus that sustainability piece truly allows the time for it to marinate and kick in. And again, it's not a knock on in person. If you happen to have the luxury, you're talking about people coming in from all around the world, things like that. Fine. But you can have people who might be in the same building, probably not now, but they might go back to the same building, where you might say, we have this experience, but it doesn't have to be 3 days. It might be an hour or 2 hours this day, an hour, 2 hours this day, 3, whatever. And you space that out so people actually have time to grow. So it's interesting that the experience has been, you've actually been able to enrich the experience in this new world.
Yeah, but it also comes with additional challenges, of course. I mean, when you have people together for 3 or 4 days on such an intense journey in a program, the dynamic helps you go through this, and it makes it very intense. And that's something you have to keep up when you only see people every 3-4 days or so virtually. How do you keep up the energy? How do you keep up the commitment of people? Because at the same time, obviously, other things are going on for them. I mean, their reality.
New priorities. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And that is one of our challenges, obviously, that how to keep them committed to that learning challenge they have, besides all the other challenges they have in their professional life.
Okay. And again, that is a real challenge. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think a lot of organizations struggled with in 2020. I think a lot of organizations struggled with this in 2020 as they moved into the virtual space. Was there are definite benefits to having things in person. You have people there, you have them completely isolated. You can kind of like capitalize on that moment, and you start to space that out. Competing priorities, other challenges, just even the energy and momentum behind it can start to wane. So I think, have there been some things in the couple minutes we have left that have worked really well to help make that still carry that energy and momentum?
Yeah, I think what we learned and what we realized is how important it is in the early stage of the process to invest some time on the purpose question. Okay. So that they really challenge each other. Why are we doing this? And what is the benefit? And if they get that out, if they crystallize that in the beginning, that helps keep up the energy. If they fail doing that, or if they postpone that, or if they don't do that at all, then the likelihood that things fall apart and the commitment goes down is much higher. So therefore, we have learned to push them on that purpose question a lot more in the beginning than we used to when we started.
Okay, got it. Well, I love that, and I think sometimes it goes to this whole saying of sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. I think the same is true to sometimes you need to make those investments on the front end to really get the sustainability. So I can see where just making sure you're building that commitment, that trust, that value, that purpose on the front end of saying, here's what we're all here to do. You wait to do that. I'm sure by the second, third session, people are kind of like, I'm not, I'm not really into this anymore. Or I've got other things that are taking up more of my time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I'm not going to open up anything new, because if I do, we will go way over time. I told you, you doubted me, and I told you. So we are at the top of the hour. So I'm going to wrap us up. But honestly, Guido, this has been fantastic. And anybody listening or watching, if you're thinking about action learning, or how do you actually build experiential learning, or questioning whether that can be done virtually, I mean, if this conversation hasn't given you some food for thought, or some insights, or some things to change your perspective, I don't know what else we can do for it. But it sounds like, I love what you guys are doing with this. I love where you're taking it. And I think it's a really cool way to bring action learning to life, to solve a lot of these different challenges for folks. So I've shared a video in the comments if you want to see a little bit more. But again, definitely people can check out what you all are doing and get involved in that. So thank you, Guido, for joining me today. Maybe you can make it to Australia, maybe not today, but maybe soon. And hopefully this won't be our last conversation.
Hopefully. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Have a great one, everybody, and have a wonderful weekend.